welcome to Ignatius Press Off the Shelf as we conclude our Broadway run here. But we are going to make our final book, John Henry Newman, A Life Sacrifice. I better hold it up a little longer so those who are watching see it. I find it fascinating. We are on chapter 6, Rome, and I will then turn this over to you, Joseph.
Wait, before you do, don't you love this subtitle? A mix of hatred and love.
That's right, and especially because it's chronological. His early life, his view of the Church of Rome, the Catholic Church, and then what happens and how he really converts against his desire, against all his emotional attachments. But he has this. He has to do what is right. He has to find the truth. It's beautiful. And also, I said it before, but I'll say it again. I've read many things by Newman in the course of my long life, but not his letters. His writing is just so limpid, so beautiful, so clear, so persuasive. And then you realize that while he was doing this, he was suffering immensely from what he had to do. Anyway, okay, so is that your comment?
Yeah. I just wanted to not overlook the.
That was brief.
Unusual.
Unusually brief. I don't want to say that you said it. Okay. Thou hast said it. Joseph.
Yeah, well, it's just to comment upon Vivian's comment. It is a bit. It's not often that you have a subheading to the title of a chapter in a book about a saint with the word hatred in it. But of course, this is about a conversion story, as you say, and he was very anti-Catholic in the years prior to his conversion, and that's something which comes out here. The first thing I actually have highlighted is not until page 145, so I'm happy to defer to others.
Well, having spent some time in evangelical Protestant churches here in this country, this just brief little line in the middle of 139 that Newman was convinced that Rome was the Antichrist. I mean, this is what these churches teach even now, today. Some of these Protestant churches, that Rome is the Antichrist. And so, to tell you the truth, I was not prepared to discover that he felt that way, because leader of the Oxford movement, he's trying to bring to the Church of England some of these Catholic elements in faith and practice that had been lost. I was shocked to find out he felt so strongly that Rome was the Antichrist.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, we know that he was a low church Protestant in his younger days, but by the time the Oxford movement's happening in the 1830s and early 1840s, you think that the Catholic understanding of history, the Catholic understanding of ecclesiology, the Catholic sensibility would make them sort of pro-Roman Catholic. But it's just really weird that they've got all the anti-papist prejudice, even though they want to graft the Anglican Church onto the ancient church. It's a combination.
Well, I think that's the contradiction which led Newman finally to accept the truth of the Roman Catholic Church, is that he wanted these Catholic elements like the sacraments and the real presence and the fathers of the church, but he wanted to see that distinct from or separate from the ugly or the external political institutional side of the Catholic Church. But the thing is, you can't separate those things out.
Right, and also, I mean,
because we're all like that.
That's right. That's right.
I mean, also his prejudice presumptions. I don't think he questioned necessarily a lot of his prejudice presumptions about the Catholic Church prior to his conversion. That he just was quite happy to say, well, we can be Catholic without having to be Roman, and you can keep all your anti-Roman, anti-papist prejudices and be a Catholic. A bit like many evangelicals today, they don't cross the Tiber; they cross the Aegean and become Orthodox. Because that allows them, so they think, to circumvent the problem of the papacy, etc.
And we have a problem all three of us and those of our generations, I say plural, uh, in that in our lifetime, in our mature adult lifetime, what have we experienced? Pius XII, John the 23rd, John Paul II, Benedict the 16th. I mean, we've seen exemplary popes, intellectually, very uh, accomplished popes, spiritually very devout popes. So this idea that we had these, you know, corrupt and you know,
Despicable.
yeah, a pope who has an illegitimate child who becomes a pope after him, who has an illegitimate child who pope after him. I mean, that actually happened.
Yep. And worse, and even worse than that.
Yeah. Well, what's worse than that? Well, again, no, there's things worse than that.
Murder.
That's true. It's like Dante. It's top ring is the lust.
So the other prejudice though, and this also came as kind of a shock to me, on page 141 in the middle there, Newman hardly knew a single Catholic personally.
Yeah.
In England, there were a few quiet, almost publicity-shy loners and eccentrics from the old Catholic families. I immediately thought of Brideshead Revisited, the Marshmain family. And there was the flood of Irish workers that poured unceasingly into the new industrial cities, repulsive, incredibly neglected hordes who were shaken by the stunning depth of their misery to a level below even the lowest levels of the English proletariat. That is who the Catholics were. And, what also shocked me about this, I knew he'd been in Birmingham. This was before his conversion, of course, but there was to me a kind of appreciation of how mortifying this really was for him, that if this had been his view of the Irish Catholic immigrants, now to be sent to this working class town after becoming a Catholic to Birmingham, where a lot of the factory workers and miners are just this sort, you realize how mortifying this was to him given his previous attitudes. There really was a purification happening to him where all of these prejudices had to be overcome as part of his conversion. And
Almost if as if Christ is leading him purgatorially to himself. But Birmingham as well. Bearing in mind that Newman's in love with Oxford, that's the city of dreamy spires. Um, Birmingham was a village before the Industrial Revolution, so there was no history there. It was everything was built within the last 70 or 80 years, most of it ugly with chimneys and smoke and filth, and then the small houses of people working in the factories. I mean, it was slums and factories.
yes,
That's what he moved to, and smoke and pollution.
yes,
From the medieval city of Oxford, it really was. You can imagine it being a culture shock.
yes,
And it happened here also in the United States, and a little later. But when we had this, Anglican WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture, and the Episcopalian Church, which was kind of the nobility, the aristocracy, so to speak, all of a sudden we get this horde of Irish and Italians, especially. I was surprised the Germans actually have more immigrants than the Irish and Italian, but nevertheless, what do? They came here escaping poverty. They came working on the canals, the Erie Canal, and the railroads, and all sorts of stuff, taking the lower jobs, maids and things. So, what was the Catholic Church to these people? What these despicable lower classes?
Well, when I became a Catholic, I was baptized an Episcopalian, but I didn't come from a practicing family at all. And so I figured, who would care what I would become religiously? But when I told my family members that I was going to become a Catholic, they were shocked. Why would you do that? Of all the churches to join, why would you join a church full of ignorant, poor foreigners? I mean, it was the classic WASP reaction.
And for me, where I grew up, this was racist as well, because that Catholicism was the religion of those sort of darker skinned people,
Yeah.
the swarthy people from the Mediterranean countries, the Italians and the Spanish and the Portuguese, not like Northern Europeans without blue eyes, and the Irish, of course, were sort of the odd ones out, but we had our own prejudice towards them. So it was also all mixed up with racism, quite frankly.
Yes, yes, it was. And you can see that Newman had been touched by this himself in this
Yeah.
paragraph here.
Lest I forget, Joseph, I'm going to say something here which is partly related to what we're talking about, but I predict you will use in one of your essays. Um, Newman goes to Littlemore, right? And that's like small is beautiful, more is less. He goes to little more. So little is more.
Yes, thank you, Father. I will steal that. And as T.S. Eliot says,
I'll
good
see it
writers don't
somewhere.
borrow.
I'll see that published somewhere. Okay.
Yeah, T.S.
You
Eliot
don't need, you
says,
don't need to footnote it. That's okay.
yeah, so I said, T.S. Eliot says that good writers don't borrow, they steal. So I'll just take it. You'll get no credit.
There you go. There you go. So then you said your first underline, Joseph, was 145.
Yes.
145, yeah.
Okay, so on 143, so we have this description of Newman's experiences at home. Well, when he goes abroad and visits Italy,
Yes.
what does he see there that only confirms his worst prejudices about Italians, about the church, about the papal states? I mean, this description of the papal states on 143, I'm not going to read it all, but it really does sound horrible, to tell you the truth. And it would not have put the church in a very good light.
Yeah.
Am I correct? When Newman actually entered the Catholic Church, he was received by an Italian priest, right?
I don't know, Father.
Okay.
Oh, and there's
Oh yes,
some.
he was in Littlemore. Yes, it was the Italian priest. I've forgotten his name, but I think he's been beatified now. Who took his personal mission was to actually evangelize as missionary territory the English. That
Yes,
was that was his fixation. And yes, Newman was received in the church by this holy Italian priest. At Littlemore in 1845, but I can't remember his name, which mea culpa.
We'll find out. I will say that that's not an oxymoron, by the way. A
What's that?
holy Italian priest. Onward.
Are we ready for 145 now?
yes.
Okay. So the last complete paragraph of the page there, I'll just read it. Then want to comment upon it, and maybe perhaps either you can enlighten me. He knew nothing of the strong currents of rebirth, filled with hope, stirring in France and Germany. He certainly never heard the names of the German romantics, of Schlegel, Brentano, or Stolberg, the circle around Princess Galitzin or Clement Maria Hofbauer, any more than he heard of the reform of the French orders, the Benedictines of Salem, or the Carthusians and Trappists in those years. So this is uh, obviously this is a consequence of the fact this is being written by a German scholar who knows about the situation in Europe. Now, yeah, I know something about Schlegel and admire him. I know about the Benedictines of Salem. I know about up to a point about German Romanticism, but a lot of these names are unfamiliar to me, and it's a great shame um, that really we're not enlightened because her readership, her initial German readership, would have presumably known about these people and no further explanation was needed. But perhaps a footnote of some sort might have been helpful there because I'm sure that most vast majority of people reading this were that who are these people? Newman had no idea about them, knew nothing about them, but then nor do we. That's the problem.
Yeah, good point. I mean, I recognize the names except Stolberg, but I don't recall who they were. I do know theologically in Germany, you had around the time Newman was uh, in the 30s or 40s, Johann Möller from Tübingen, tremendous theologian on the Holy Spirit and on the church. And then Matthew Shaban would have been later, around time Newman, I don't even a Catholic, but there was in Germany certainly a theological revival on the Catholic side. On the Protestant side, you had all this historical criticism coming, from German scholars, which I think would probably have not interested Newman that much as it does interest me that much. But yeah, there was uh, a rebirth movement in Germany and certainly in France, where you had Salem with what's his name? Oh my gosh,
Garanger, yeah? Garanger? Was it Garanger?
what's his name?
Gue the
Oh,
next.
Guéranger. No. Guéranger would be. Oh, maybe it was Guéranger. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I think he was connected to that whole
that's right.
liturgical revival
That's
that
right.
was going on at the time in France. And Schlegel, I'm sitting on an article for the St. Austin Review on Schlegel. He's a very interesting fellow. But anyway,
I
I thought
didn't.
I'd
I
reference
didn't know
that
he was.
because
Was he? I didn't know he was Catholic though. Schlegel was Catholic.
I think Schlegel became Catholic. He certainly his critique of philosophically and theologically was led away from. He saw the Reformation as destructive and disastrous, and yeah, fragmentary.
Okay. Well, of course, for me, Schlegel means a lock. I mean, because in America, when I was a kid, almost all the locks were made by the Schlegel company. So you looked at a lock, it was a Schlegel
Oh,
on
that's
it.
right. That's right. Well, Joseph, the paragraph just above that. So all of the things that Newman sees that horrify him about the Catholic Church, here's one good thing he does see. And that is, he was deeply touched by the insight that the Catholic Church saw her main concern in pastoral care.
Yes.
Unlike the English Church, which essentially tended to be to the respectable circles and individuals interested in religion, but which left the masses to the Methodist sects almost unstopped and
Unopposed.
unopposed. Yes, thank you. So yes, for this, for him to confront, for all of its warts and corruptions and everything else, the Catholic Church, you have to say, even to this day, is still this witness in the world. It's concerned for the pastoral care of the poor, the sick. I mean, in all of it. So that moved Newman, I thought was important to point out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it may sound like he was in isolation or something like that, but I think about the fact that, like here at Ignatius Press, we work here, we have mass together, we have meals together, and we have other friends outside, me less than most of you, but I mean, still, we don't have much association with Southern Baptists or Methodists, or we don't have a religious association with them. We have other association with them, and so we're kind of the same. My own experience was that when I became a chaplain in the army, kind of a contract chaplain they call it. I mean, that's when I met other Christians, Methodist, Baptist, non-denominational they call them. But apart from that, I would have known them.
Right. Whereas I grew up
Yeah,
in those circles, family members being members of all those groups, and then part of those groups myself. And I still have friends, dear friends, who are not Catholic, who come from different Protestant denominations. So you're right, though. I mean, through no fault of anybody, you do end up in the circle you end up with,
right.
and so
We're all limited, so we're all in our little world. And then
I grew up drinking a load of hedonistic nuns, but that's NONES, not NUNS.
well, that was the funny thing about my own family was that no one was practicing a religion of any kind, and yet the one thing they were all agreed on: Catholics, big no.
bad, yeah.
But they
Yeah.
all had historically connections to Baptists and Methodists and Episcopalians and this and that, but nobody was really going to church.
So my next passage, I've just got one sentence highlighted on page 147. You'd like me to go ahead and read that?
Sure.
There's the new paragraph there. He regarded the converts from his band of young followers who had made their way to Rome before him with deep reservation, with grief and distrust. He did everything to stop them. So again, obviously, some people. I mean, I remember Ronald Knox commenting upon reading Orthodoxy, because Chesterton, of course, wrote Orthodoxy 14 years before he became a Catholic, and Ronald Knox said, "Well, Chesterton made a Catholic of me long before he became a Catholic himself." And I think that Newman was somewhat, whereas Chesterton, I don't think would have at least a bit worried about it. Newman, I think, was somewhat perplexed and even apoplexed by the fact that what he was writing was leading some people to the logical and theological conclusion that they needed to become Catholics.
Hmm.
And he didn't see it until obviously sometime later.
Hmm.
And after that, the next thing I have is 152, unless anybody wants to go before that.
Well, just to attempt a brief summary here of the whole ductus or movement of this chapter, see if I'm right on this, but what she is showing, Ida Gerdes, is that in his early career, Newman clearly saw the Roman Catholic Church as Antichrist, even though he wanted to Catholicize the Anglican Church. Then he gets this doubt. For 5 years, he's, perplexed. He doesn't want to do it. He forgets it. He comes back again. But because he's trying to find the truth of things, what's real, that keeps impinging upon his thoughts. But even then he wants to make sure he's not doing this out of emotion or being deceived or not understanding all they should understand. But it takes him 5 years before he finally says, "Yes, I must become a Catholic." And even then, he doesn't want to lead others astray. He does not want to, impose his own choice on others. But he fully embraces the Catholic Church's teaching, and then the Catholic Church, with all its warts. But so this whole chapter is showing this kind of a transformation with a big 5 year hiatus, if you will, while he's struggling. And is that a fair summary, or you want to?
I think it is. I think that what we have in this chapter especially is this struggle between the absolute intellectual honesty which marks Newman, his life and his character, with visceral, emotional reactions rooted in deep prejudices that he has to somehow uproot in order for that intellectual honesty and integrity to actually win out. I think that's what's going on here. It's like an arm wrestle between honesty on the one hand, rational honesty on the one hand, and irrational emotion on the other.
Well, I love this paragraph on 151, the top paragraph starting at the end of the first line. Newman does not approach the Catholic Church like a homeless person who was looking in her for warmth, security, and everything that has been missing in his life. Rather, for him, it is much more like a man who, happy in the lap of love, experiences in silence, but ever more and more intensely, the dreadful doubt about the validity of his marriage creeping up.
That's a good.
I just think this image is
Yeah.
right.
Well, that's Gurus, and
Yeah, that's Gurus,
that's
but
the strength of Gurus.
yes, that she can come up with an image like this,
Yep, very good. So I've got a lot highlighted on the page, bottom of 152, that bottom paragraph, and most of 153. So I'm not going to read it all because it's just too much. But this what we've just been talking about. These are various letters where he basically says the last thing I want to be is a Catholic. But believe me, if I could find any way out, including death, I would rather have that than following where my intellect and my reason seems to be leading me, certainly not his emotions. And so he said, Keble, just the one quote in the middle of page 153 there, so his great friend in the Oxford movement, Keble, I am setting my face absolutely towards the wilderness. In other words, it got to be finding himself uh, almost forced to become a Catholic. It's not like coming home from the desert, from the wasteland, but having to embark into the desert, into the wasteland. So again, it's like you said, the earlier passage about It's not about the homeless person coming home. It's about the person who's at home becoming homeless.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. And
But
then,
yeah,
and then to
but
realize,
it's sorry, please.
I was just going to say, to realize that he wrote this poem, Lead Kindly Light, which is the most famous, I think, of his poems, probably, that he wrote that in the midst of this. That was an epiphany for me. It's quoted
I
in
thought
one.
I thought he wrote that earlier than this. I mean, I
It
didn't
wasn't
realize
early.
that. I
It
thought
was
that
kind of
was
premonition. It wasn't during this time. It
Oh,
was earlier, but it was almost like a prophetic,
oh,
prescient premonition of what he's going to go
and that's
through.
exactly what it says. His most popular poem was written 12 years earlier, but it almost prophetically anticipates his interior path in the years of his decision. Okay, thanks for clarifying.
where is that, Vivian?
On
Sorry, I'm not seeing.
154, right beneath the poem itself, the author
Okay,
points out that it was written earlier.
yeah. Um, Yeah, and I like these quotes from Loss and Gain, where the character Reading, Charles Reading, who's the sort of basically autobiographical figure in that quasi autobiographical novel. So towards the bottom of page 153, there, this is quote from Reading in the novel, which obviously in persona uh, Newman, if you like. Certainty, in its highest sense, is the reward of those who, by an act of the will and at the dictate of reason and prudence, embrace the truth when nature, like a coward, shrinks. So again, that is what we're talking about, really. That he knows the truth, but he doesn't like it,
Mhm.
and he'd rather it weren't true. Um, yeah,
But it's interesting that certainty is the reward. It's kind of like a leap of faith in one sense, but it's not an irrational leap. But it's a he. I think as a grammar percent, where he talks about proof by convergence, a lot of little things pointing to the same thing, and you finally get certainty. But uh, he uh, he receives certainty as a reward for accepting what he sees as true, but doesn't have the full certainty for him. But I have to take a risk here, and then he
right.
gets the reward.
Yeah. Now, it depends whether we actually would really like to keep to one chapter, pacing us on one chapter per session. But I have nothing until page 162 and 163, right at the end of the chapter. But I'm happy, of course, and I've obviously skipped quite a few pages here, so I'm happy to defer to anyone else.
Well, as I said, a lot of these pages are sort of uh, confirmation, backup, more quotes of the same principle. So you don't have to take every one of them, but
Mhm.
maybe I have nothing specific. I want to
Well, I think one thing, I don't know how much longer do we have on this
about
little
5
session
minutes
here.
or 4 minutes.
I think one thing to understand too is for him to realize that it's not just the doctrines of the faith that one, in becoming a Catholic, it's not simply the doctrines of the faith that one is assenting to, but to the authority that has promulgated and guarded them. He realized that this went together. He's putting his faith on 155 here toward the top. Faith encompasses two things: what someone believes and from whom he believes it. And I noticed this in a lot of conversion stories. You know, you can come to see in the Catholic Church the beauty of her faith and teaching and worship and all of these things. You are saying yes, yes, yes. And then that last big hurdle. But these people who are in charge, do I have to put my faith in them too? That's really where it bites.
Which is, but it's true. Yeah, by their fruits you shall know them. Obviously, it's a cause of scandal when people who are preaching one thing are quite clearly practicing the other, and that does put up an obstacle to people's faith.
So when he realizes on the top of 156, this is Gurris's words, but this is Newman's conclusion. A living church has always been the seat, shrine, and guarantor of the truth. Without a living bearer, the teachings which he accepts without doubt would never have reached us. So another one of these aha moments for him, that he's got to take the whole enchilada. And then the clincher for me on 161, where he comes to realize that Rome is the mother of English Christianity. So
Where is that? Sorry,
on
Vivian.
161 toward the bottom,
What's the bottom? Oh yeah, okay.
in
Thank
spite
you.
of my ingrained fears of Rome and the decision of my reason and conscience against her usages, in spite of my affection for Oxford and Oriel, and yet I had a secret longing love of Rome, the mother of English Christianity. So that's just it, you know. Once you figure that out, she's the mother.
Yeah.
Who can't love his mother? Right? In fact, isn't that one of de Lubach's sort of starting points for
yes. Mother
his
of the church.
yeah? She's my mother. How can I not love her?
Yeah.
Good.
Well, I've got a couple of questions here. So page 162, that final paragraph. He says, "My own convictions are as strong as I suppose they can become. Only it is so difficult to know whether it is a call of reason or of conscience. I cannot make out if I am impelled by what seems clear or by a sense of duty." And I've just written 3 question marks in the margin there because I'm trying to grapple with this distinction between conscience and reason, because certainly someone who is as honest intellectually as Newman, if something becomes clear rationally, wouldn't their conscience be determined by that? In other words, that they would have to act in accordance with what had become clear, in accordance with reason. I don't really understand. I'm just grappling with it. I'm not disagreeing. I just don't really
Well,
know
you-
what
Chapter on
what's
the
being
conscience.
said.
chapter on conscience, which
Yeah.
is at the end here, kind of as a
Appendix almost, yeah.
appendix almost.
Yeah.
The chapter on conscience. That's where we get Newman's struggle with making clear in his own mind that that as important as the use of reason is, it also is the very thing that can be a tool to give us what we like, as opposed to what really is true. And he discusses that in depth, I think, in that chapter, right?
Right. And I think, Joseph, that there is a distinction between speculative knowledge or knowledge of the truth and moral knowledge, knowledge of what's right and wrong. And they're definitely connected because what's right and wrong is determined by the intellect. Okay. Nevertheless, you can see a kind of distinction between what's logical, this makes sense, and so on. And there's an intellectual assent, but with right and wrong, conscience gives you a sense of shame or of I've failed or whatever. It's a different kind of a reaction you have to what your conscience is telling you, you know.
Okay.
And so,
But I'm happy to defer our conversation to the chapter on conscience on this. I just felt that it's puzzling me. And then
yeah,
on the next page, maybe we can conclude here where he talks about um, uh, there's the long Latin phrase which I won't mess up, by St Ambrose, but it's translated, "It's not by logic that it has pleased God to save His people." And again, you know, what motivates God? That's an impenetrable question, right? If it's not purely logical, in other words, theological, that it's necessary through reason, then in what sense does God's love um, transcend, supersede, superimpose itself upon reason, or are the two ultimately conflated as one? Because here, if they are conflated as one, then there is no conflict with logic. Anyway, these deep questions are puzzling me when it's not by logic, because it's St Ambrose who says this. So who am I to question it, I suppose? But it's not by logic that it's pleased God to save His people. We know that God loves, lays down His life. He doesn't owe us any of that, but that nonetheless, there's a sense that the justice demands it if we are going to be forgiven for the grotesqueness of our sin. That the sinless one has to take it away. So there is a sort of rational logic theological reason for what God does in the incarnation. But what animates it? Is it
Yes,
logic?
but I
You know,
think the point here is that mere logic, if you can kind of abstract it from everything else, from the incarnation in your body and from the sense of moral duty, mere logic isn't enough, you know. And it's like, some people become Catholics because the arguments are so strong. But a lot of people, you know, it's different. They see they see a mother and a child and how she treats her child when she's Catholic, and that moves them. And that logic must be embodied to be persuasive. Put it that way.
yeah, and I suppose the other thing would be, is logic not reason per se, but a subset of it. In which case,
Yes.
reason, if you like, is
I-
something larger. Yeah, okay, well, that's probably deeper than
All
we needed
right.
to go.
Well, let's conclude then. Thanks everyone for listening and watching. If you're still here, we'll see you soon on chapter 7.